to my destination rather than walking there or taking the tube. I'm sure everyone's got their own different reasons. Rising fuel costs is another big one.
But what about the provision for cyclists? Do you think that that is keeping pace?
No, absolutely not. There's been a lot of underfunding in the past 5 years, and this announcement today finally shows that TfL is really starting to listen to those cyclist concerns that they've sort of ignored for so long, and they see cycling as a great solution for the pollution and congestion problems that we've got here in London.
And from what you've heard, is it going to be enough?
Well, I think it's not so much a case of the funding. I mean, I was talking to your makeup lady on the way in, and she said, I'd love to cycle more if only there was segregated cycle lanes that kept me safe out there. So it's not a case of how much money, it's a case of how will that money exactly be spent, and that's what remains to be seen.
Because if we look at the UK compared with other countries, the Netherlands, for example, is set up for cycling. They have a much safer system in place there. Would you like to see something like that working here?
Yes, absolutely, and most cycle campaigners are currently aiming for that sort of Dutch-style infrastructure that keeps cyclists safe on the road.
And what about other things that could be brought in? Compulsory helmets, for example. Do you think that there's more that cyclists can do themselves to help with safety issues?
Unfortunately, this is kind of an old argument that keeps coming up, the sort of helmet compulsion, but what we know for a fact is that if tomorrow you introduce compulsory helmet use, you'd see a dramatic drop in the number of cyclists, and that's based on what's happened in models in other cities that have gone down the compulsory helmet use route. So if you want to decrease the number of cyclists, then introduce compulsory helmet use tomorrow.
And there are those, of course, that make their way around the streets and do get frustrated with some of the activities that they see cyclists doing, for example, not stopping at red light. So what do you say of that for those who are speaking out against how some cyclists behave?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with them. I mean, it's just as frustrating for me. I'm at a traffic light and a cyclist comes whizzing past, and I think, you're not giving us a good image here. But the problem is, I mean, it's very different for when a cyclist goes through a red light. There's sort of far less danger to pedestrians than when a car goes through a red light. So it's a case of, I mean, you can ask, most drivers out there can ask themselves, have you ever, gone over the speed limit? I think cyclists as well occasionally break the rules, and it's unfortunate when they do, and I personally never do that myself.
And listen, if you had to look a few years down the line, how do you think our roads will have changed? How do you think that the number of cyclists on our roads will have changed?
Yeah, well, I hope we'll see a dramatic increase, because there's certainly no more room for cars in London, and we're going to see a big population increase of something like 1.5 million over the next over the next 10, 20 years in London. So there's really a limit. We've reached the limit of how many cars we can fit in the city. And indeed, most people now are starting to look at other modes of transport. And through many of the bridges in central London, you'll now see more cyclists than cars and taxis combined. So it's about time that TfL caught up with these changing dimensions in our city and started to really provide some safe infrastructure for cyclists. And they're providing for a sort of 5%, we're looking for a 5% modal share in the next sort of 10 to 15, 20 years. Cycling. Okay. Now, the investment doesn't really match that at the moment. It's only 2%, so we'll have to see what happens.
Okay, Andreas Kambanis there, who runs the website londoncyclist.co.uk. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.